Okay, we just are more than 200 now, so I think it's a good threshold value to begin this webinar. Claire, if I can have the first slide, please. So I have to say that we are very, very pleased to welcome you for this webinar. If I can have the first slide, Claire, please. The webinar, so for informing you on the European co-funded partnership on biodiversity. Its title is Rescuing Biodiversity to Safeguard Life on Earth. So it has been jointly developed between member states, countries and regions across Europe. And so Hilde Egerman from BELSPO and myself from French Foundation for Research on Biodiversity are acting on behalf of these actors. And we have co-designed the partnership in strong link with so EC services, and in particular DG Research and Innovation with Josefina and Fetake in particular, and DG Environment with Karin Zonberger. So we are very, very pleased. We consider it's a really highly important moment, I would say, in the development of the research and innovation community on biodiversity in Europe. Why? Because it will be a key tool to promote collaboration across borders, transnational activities, and across disciplines for research on biodiversity, but also it will be a key tool to reinforce the link between researchers and stakeholders, a broad range of stakeholders on biodiversity. It will be an adequate tool also to reinforce the link between research and monitoring on biodiversity. There is a kind of divide for now between the two. And it will be a key tool to reinforce the link between research and policy, to provide policy support from science. And here also, I think it's needed to step in. And this will allow impact. That is, this is the objective of European partnerships, but I think we will demonstrate that the way we have thought and co-designed this partnership will allow to promote impact for biodiversity. The interest and openness of this partnership, I think it's well represented by the audience we have today. We have in total 400, more than 400 participants subscribing. And just for you to know, we have academia representing less than 200, but then we have nearly 30 for ministry in charge of research, 46 research funding organizations, 15 foundations, but also 34 representatives of ministries in charge of environment, 10 EPAs, environmental protection agencies, and then we have also 13 representatives from the European Commission, 10 from different European initiatives, a few national contact points, other governmental administration and ministry in charge of agriculture, and finally 17 business and private companies, and 45 other non-academic stakeholders. I think it's was a good, I would say, a broad range of audience, and I think it reflects quite well what we aim at with this partnership. Okay, so to conclude this introduction, my side, just want to say that for Biodiversity, it's a key moment because for this partnership, we partly capitalize on all the work done, all the achievements made by Biodiversity in the past. We will also capitalize on many skills, many achievements of many other initiatives, including MAES and many others. And I use the opportunity to thank a lot the European Commission for all the support provided to us during the past years. It's more than 15 years now that we have a joint venture to reinforce the era on biodiversity And I think the European Commission here proposing this new tool is an incredible opportunity for the domain. And I'm very pleased now to give the floor to John Bell. So John Bell is the director of Healthy Planet at DG Research and Innovation. I guess a lot of work when you're director of Healthy Planet at the time. So thanks a lot for taking time for this introduction, John. You're in charge of many sectors, bioeconomy, agriculture, food, and marine areas also. So I'm very pleased to give you the floor for an introduction to this webinar. Thanks a lot, John.
Merci, Xavier. Thank you very much, Hilda and Claire and all our colleagues. I assume you can hear me. I've been, like everybody else, I spent half of my life trying to be reconnected. I'm thrown out of more rooms than I have been since I was a teenager at discos. But anyway, there we go. One of the great things about today is it's really happening at a moment where everybody, in the way in which this strange time that we're living through, has been asked to come back and come to terms with our immediate natural environment, the systems that support us, the systems that, if we don't look after them, produce great risks, and not simply because of these very big numbers on extinction and that, but they are our life support conditions. So the timing of this event, as it happens, is the day before the Commission will adopt a new biodiversity strategy. And one of the reasons I can't stay very long is we're discussing with our Commissioner at 2 o'clock exactly where we are on research and innovation's role in biodiversity, where it must be a much more ambitious role in supporting not simply the observation, but the transformation that needs to take place to protect, restore, understand, and nurture the life support system from which we all spring. So I'd like to thank you, Xavier and colleagues, for giving us this opportunity for all the great work that BiodiVERSA has been doing. You're kind of your own kind of powerful policy biodiversity engine for European collaboration across regional, national, and European levels and systems to place biodiversity research at the center of these great transitions. Rescuing biodiversity to safeguard life on Earth is, it's a pretty bold title, but it's a time for boldness. It's like me having Healthy Planet as my key performance indicator is a little bit onerous sometimes. But if we're going to do something in Europe, we got to do it together, and it should be ambitious. So I strongly support the focus of this webinar as the beginning of a new chapter in our cooperation, in our investment, in our policy support, and in our drive to make this transition happen. It's a call for action today as much as anything else. It's a call to link in a way that has never really been the case up to now, science and policy action, science and citizens, something we've been trying to attempt for many years within the Commission. It's happening much more visibly now in the field of biodiversity, not just because of the urgency to act, but because of the collaboration that people like yourselves and those who will be participating in the seminar have been nurturing and developing between notably research, innovation, and the environmental policy departments of the Commission. I know Umberto will be talking later on. There's a real co-creation taking place now, not simply in the areas like Horizon Europe's preparation, but also as we work for these new European Green Deal policies that I'll mention a little bit. And the idea of this partnership that could bring together key research funders and the implementers of EU environmental policies has been floated and developed because of this work that you've been developing and nurturing over many years. And here we have today, I think, the thinkers, the funders, and the doers, and those who have to make this a living reality, setting a common agenda and acting together. So it's a very important moment. Research, innovation, knowledge, and how they're used in policy making is extremely complex when, in the normal terms, but when we're looking at radical, urgent, and transformational change that needs to take place, where we can't simply take things at face value, where we need monitoring, where we need feedback to policy, where we need to support people on the ground who need to work out what the lessons of science and research and innovation are for their their square mile on this earth where they're trying to make these things take place is a very important process. And I think this cycle needs to be addressed and constantly reviewed. So one of the things we're taking up with our colleagues across the Commission is not only should we be, commissioning science and building the partnership and developing the infrastructures and the databases and the dissemination and the analysis, we need to have much more field work and demonstrations, but we also need to have access of people who are on the ground by definition trying to make this transition happen. What kind of scientific service do they need from us in the years ahead, where they actually have to make these things happen on the ground? So very important. Now, your 15 years of achievement are quite something, and the document you'll be preparing today, it's really a truly inclusive and ambitious biodiversity partnership, bringing together the European Union institutions, the member states, to create a pan-European biodiversity strategic research agenda. And it simply would not have happened without the work that's gone before it. These things, a bit like biodiversity itself, they don't just spring out of nowhere. There's a lot of work that has gone into this. And we're counting on you to help us to navigate with this partnership the kind of direction that we need to set together between the different levels of policy and research and governance as we move ahead. So as with Horizon 2020, where we've already engaged for the protection of biodiversity and ecosystems, we've invested more or less 2 billion euros, I think, with innovations in the area, for example, of nature-based solutions, agroecology, research infrastructure, in ecosystems valuation, in the basic science on a number of endangered species, such as pollinators. And I think probably when you talk about the role of science in society and transition, only probably in climate and in biodiversity has science actually changed the direction and the framing of policy and knowledge rapidly by the quality, the authenticity, and the urgency of its findings. So this work that we've been commissioning is having a major impact. The novelty is that we welcome now another part of the equation, and that's the goal to align our research agendas with the policy and the implementation needs. So this is all part of the link that needs to be made so that transition goes from idea and conception and collaboration and testing and monitoring into actual transition and implementation and scaling up on the ground. The new European Green Deal, I mentioned earlier on, offers unique opportunities for our research to drive the transitions for biodiversity needed by scientists and called for by scientists for many years. And in the Green Deal, we're actually developing a Green Deal call, which will happen later this year, where we will have the opportunity to test and demonstrate risk restoration, regeneration, and nature-based solutions and protection at a very important level. I mentioned at the outset the new EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 to be launched tomorrow. It's a critical part of the Green Deal. In many ways, it's a litmus test for the Green Deal because it's such a sensitive area of policy. And many elements from the strategy are inspired by the outcomes of the European Union's research and innovation programs down the years. It's a great landmark, I think, as well as a departure point. So we need research and innovation to have a much more ambitious role in the next phase, given that we're running out of time. We need to help to drive the transition to more sustainable food systems, agriculture, fisheries, the bioeconomy, the marine environment, aspects of climate adaptation, so forth. And this partnership could play a role as the center of gravity, as the motor in many ways of bringing together our European efforts on biodiversity research and to bring the knowledge to the policy and to the implementers in this way. And last but not least, we shouldn't think not just at the European level, but of course, as the life support systems that we are dealing with are planetary, we have an obligation, and as Europeans, a commitment to make sure that our Green Deal vision is one that we will share as a matter of urgency with our neighbours and partners around the world who need it most. So we have a global scientific commitment to bodies such as the IPCC and IPBES and their related policy conventions, the UNFCCC and the CBD. I think that's enough acronyms for one afternoon. These will need to benefit from the research results and innovative solutions stemming from Horizon Europe and its partnerships. So what we're bringing together in partnerships, the solutions, the analysis, the monitoring, the demonstration, the ways of bringing things to happen on the ground is something that must be shared, must be supported, and must be delivered globally using Horizon Europe and its partnerships. So I see a new level of ambition also with the IPBS and giving them the kind of support that's needed to take forward their assessments in the future. So it's time now to hand over to the people who are actually doing the work. I'd like to thank my own colleagues, Josefina and Marco and others who've really built this down the years. They have my absolute commitment, the commitment of our department, of our organization. We need to make something different happen here. We need a different level of ambition. We need this partnership to be something that is real in knowledge, in implementation, in impact. And I think you can count on us. We are part of the ecosystem, and policy and implementation needs to be to the ecosystem as well. It's time to turn this knowledge into a better place to live and work. And maybe one day when we're walking outside and looking at what we've achieved, we'll realize that a lot of it started here today at this point in time. So merci and thank you very much. And let's check in regularly with one another as this unfolds. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, John, for setting the scene and giving these long-term directions and the ambition overall. And indeed, it's very important, the co-design approach used here to reach the ambition. And it's also why we have organized this webinar, because it's between countries, European Commission services, but also a range of parties, stakeholders, existing initiatives, etc. We need all skills to reach the objectives. So briefly, the objectives of this webinar, it's really to inform you, that is inform potential members of the partnership. And here the full members of the partnerships, they will be ministries of research, funding agencies, foundation, along with ministries of environment and environmental protection agencies, for the reason raised by John, that is to make this link between research innovation and policy in particular, and implementation. And also we want to inform possible third parties, that is collaborators between this partnership and existing key organizations, and more generally a broad range of stakeholders. And we will inform you on the Horizon Europe per se, the process and timing for developing the kind of tools we are talking about here. It is co-funded European partnership. And more particularly then, regarding the partnership on biodiversity, the context we are developing this partnership in, the vision, objectives, and working areas, activities, plan. A few words about budget and governance, and then the next steps. So it's important, again, we are in the co-development phase. So this means that you are not supposed only to ask questions, but you may have comments, suggestions, etc. And we will listen to this. I can remind some of you that we have already co-organized with DG Environment, DG Research Innovation, and BiodivERsA in November, I think, in Brussels. We have organized a workshop already to present a very early draft of the partnership to a broad range of stakeholders. And so it's another step here. Okay, so this will allow us to develop this partnership. And now I give the floor to our colleagues from DG Research and Innovation. And I use the opportunity briefly to thank a lot Josefina, Nerea, and Marco in particular, the three of you. You have a key role working with us in this, so thanks a lot for this. Josefina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Allow me to first start with the boring definition. What do we mean when we say a partnership? A partnership, the European partnerships are EU initiatives where we want to meet together, to join private and or public partners, to commit to jointly support the development and implementation of a program of research and innovation activities. And this is, so far, we have had these joint initiatives. We have had joint programming initiatives, aeronets, joint undertakings, a myriad of different configurations. But the idea is to simplify this universe and to give more ambition. The partners could represent the industry, could represent universities or research organizations or public bodies. It could be a regional, national, or international level, and it can also include foundations and NGO. May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. But the point is that now it's going to be a single instrument. In Horizon Europe, we want to have a common architecture for all these partnerships, and we want to have different modalities. For example, this one, the biodiversity partnership, is one of the co-funded types, the one that you see in the middle, where public partners basically join together within a joint program agreed by the partners, and they commit to provide financial and also in-kind contributions for the joint program of activities. It could be co-funded calls for proposals for research, or it can be other kind of activities. But other kind of partnerships, the other two types, so we only have three types, is the co-programmed and the institutionalized. The co-programmed, in the co-program, it's the commitment is less strong. Still, there is a joint, a memorandum of understanding, joint activities and arrangements, but it's a more lax structure, and it can include private partners too. And the institutionalized is more stringent, more it's a very long-term dimension, and it's regulated by Articles 185 and 87 of the treaty, and it's more at the institutionalized level. So we understand that the biodiversity partnership could really be at the juste milieu, at the middle of a very strong level of commitment without the rigidity of the institutionalized partnerships. Important key features is that there is a coherent life cycle, so the programming, and there is an agreement and a common programming, and a strategic orientation, a long-term orientation of this research. If I might, we have launched this idea. We are in the final preparation phases for Horizon Europe, which will start next year. And so far, there has been a lot of interest. 49 partnerships have been proposed, 22 of them with member states as partners, as members. Not all of them are going to start next year. Not all of them are committed to start. Maybe some won't finalize their works. This is one of the most advanced ones. We have good hopes that there will be a very strong proposal by the end of the year. And relevant examples of these partnerships that can be interacting somehow with in the biodiversity field are, of course, rescuing biodiversity to safeguard life on Earth. Also, the one on agroecology that is scheduled for 2022-2023. Water for all, it's of course very relevant for biodiversity, and it's another partnership that will need to work together with us. The blue oceans, so it's a climate neutral, sustainable and productive blue economy, and the agriculture of data that is based on Earth observation. Of these, not all of them will start immediately, so this is also an opportunity to set to pave the way and to set an example for them. And of course, we are not solving all the problems of biodiversity. We need the collaboration of everyone, but at least the fragmentation of the field would be addressed. We expect to add this strategic long-term vision, and we aim at a pan-European effort where there is no European Framework Program and the 27 programs by the all member states, but a single big vision where inside we can collaborate and complement each other, and we produce useful data and wonderful solutions. That's
Okay, thanks a lot, Josefina. And so before jumping in really the presentation of the partnership in more detail, last slide to remind you about the process and timing concerning the development and co-design of this partnership. And you can see on the slide that actually the work started very, very early 2019. We started to discuss so between countries, in particular within Biodiversity and with DG Environment and DG Research Innovation, the possibility to develop a partnership on biodiversity. This led to a two-page fiche framing the biodiversity partnership, what it could be. It was in April 2019. And so I realized that I've thanked people from DG Research Innovation some time ago, and I want to add special thanks to our DG Environment colleagues, in particular Karin and Stefan also. And so this led us to, after discussion and more work, to a consolidated fiche, which was one of the candidate partnerships proposed initially. It has been evaluated on the one hand by countries who indicated possible support to some of these partnerships. And finally, this led the European Commission to select 49 possible partnerships, including the biodiversity partnership. So very early, we have shaped this as a co-funded partnership among the three types indicated by Josefina. And we organized in November, as I said, a workshop gathering possible members, but also a range of stakeholders, a bit less than today, but there were already 200 of them in Brussels. And it was very constructive. We have really been provided with concrete recommendations, suggestions, and many of them actually we have taken into account when further elaborating the draft. So you see it's an interaction, an iterative process. And finally, we obtained an amended draft of the partnership some time ago. And final discussion with possible members, with DG Env, DG Research Innovation. And today, in May, we have a first stabilized draft of partnership. It's not the final one, but let's say the first stabilized draft. And we have this webinar to discuss with you, to present to you. And we will open a consultation, we will explain in a few days after the webinar to allow you to send feedbacks. I will say nothing about the next steps because we will finish this webinar with this, so we can move now to the next slide. And I give the floor to Hilde Egerman. So Hilde is the vice chair of BiodivERsA, and she has a key role in the development of the partnership also. So Hilde, the floor is yours. Your micro, Hilde.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for attending. So I'll give you a quick overview of the context that most of you know, of course. So we are losing indeed biodiversity and nature contributions to people at unprecedented rates in human history. And that shows from several reports that have been published over the last couple of years, and especially also last year. You have the IPBES global assessment that was instrumental. but also the IPCC report that showed that a 1.5 degrees global warming could have devastating impacts for biodiversity and for ecosystem services. We will soon have the 5th Global Biodiversity Outlook that will tell us how far we have achieved the targets under the Convention of Biodiversity. We have several other relevant reports, but there's one more that I would like to highlight, most notably the Global Risk Report that has been launched earlier this year by the World Economic Forum that showed that biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse is amongst the 5 major threats to global sustainability, and basically also that the 5 top threats are all environmental related. I'm trying to go to the next slide. So indeed, I already referred to the IPBES global assessment that identified the major drivers of biodiversity loss. These are land use change and sea use change, direct exploitation, climate change, invasive alien species, pollution, and other drivers. But not only direct drivers, but also indirect drivers. So the root causes of biodiversity loss, including, for example, unsustainable production and consumption. And what was also clear from the IPBES global assessment that if we want to put nature back on a path of recovery, we have to get very proper knowledge about biodiversity status, about biodiversity trends. We need to tackle the drivers, both the direct and the indirect drivers. We need to invest in nature as a solution for our global challenges. And we also need to invest and make the business case, so to collaborate with different sectors and mainstream biodiversity. What is also clear from the IPBES global assessment is that we are missing out on the targets. We are missing out on the Aichi targets of the Convention of Biodiversity, but we are also missing out on the SDGs. Basically, all the SDGs depend on biodiversity, and we can see that we have made very little progress there, also due to the fact that we have to cope with biodiversity loss. What is also shown from the IPBES global assessment is indeed we need action at the level of the direct drivers, but that will not be enough. We need to tackle the root causes of biodiversity loss, which means that we need what we call transformative change. We need an in-depth change across technological, economic, and societal factors. And we also need to change our goals and our values. And this indeed requires a coordinated investment also amongst research and innovation actors and biodiversity policy actors. We need a tighter link between public and private sector, and we also need science-based support to policy to make this transition a reality. Now, the policy context is quite clear because, as you know, the biodiversity strategy, both at the global level and at the EU level, will come to an end. At the EU level, you heard from John Bell that the EU biodiversity strategy will be launched tomorrow, so that one is on good track. And also on the global level, we will adopt a new deal for nature and people. The plan was that it would happen by the end of this year, but most likely it will be postponed by early next year. But we will have this new context, this new post-2020 global biodiversity framework that will guide our actions. Also, we see that there's a momentum in the context of other biodiversity-related conventions, but also in the context of the two other Rio conventions, the UNFCCC and the United Nations Convention to Combat for Desertification. So we see that there's indeed a huge momentum now. All the stars are aligning also for this partnership. And then if you look at the European context, we have raised this already. We indeed have the European Green Deal, where we can see that biodiversity loss, climate change, also land degradation, deforestation, food security, that it all comes together and that this is not decoupled from economic prosperity. And we see that the biodiversity strategy will indeed be also at the heart of the European Green Deal. A new element that is now also added to the discussion is, of course, the whole COVID crisis. It's a stark reminder for all of us on the importance of biodiversity and the relationship between biodiversity and health. It also shows us that alterations in the ecosystems, but also in the context between humans and biodiversity, determines the emergence of the zoonoses. And it's clear that we need to tackle this in a very holistic manner, not just putting all our efforts on, for example, reducing the spread of the disease, developing vaccines, improved healthcare. That is all important, but it will not be enough. We also need to invest in nature. We need to ensure equity to allow countries to recover in a sustainable way. And because of that, indeed, the European Green Deal must also be central to a resilient recovery after COVID-19. So we also try to include that element in the current version of the Biodiversity Partnership proposal, also explaining the needs to invest in research and innovation in this new context. I don't know if we maybe first want to collect a few questions from the people before we move on to the actual partnership and to the activities. I don't know, Claire, if you have received questions that we want to address.
Thank you, Hilde. Sorry, there is. Okay, so we had a few general questions maybe that we can address first, notably related to who could be partners in this partnership in terms of type of partners, and also in terms of which country could join the partnership. And then another question that might also be answered a bit later, but it's also related to who can be partners, to know if the partnership will actively and inclusively promote the participation of industry.
Yeah, each time we will have to decide on who is responding. Okay, so in one slide, because we will make the slide available, and you will see that possible members are ministries of research, research funding agencies, foundation also playing a role here, ministries of environment, and environmental protection agencies or agencies directly related to ministries of environment. So this means the one programming and funding research, and the one having a key role in biodiversity policies and implementation. By saying this, two comments my side. The first one relates to research institutes. In this partnership, research institute will not be part of the partnership that is not members, but they will be key stakeholders. They will directly benefit from the opportunities given by the partnership. And this is also why they are not on board, because there would be kind of conflict of interest to be a full member and then to benefit, for instance, for being funded for research projects, etc. So this is on the one side for research institutes. For private actors, I would like to give the floor to Josefina, because our view, collective view, I think, is to reinforce the link with business, and there are different possibilities to do so, not necessarily by being full member. Josefina?
Yes, thank you. Actually, I was writing the answer. It can be found in the question and answer part, because I saw that this was the key question: who can be member? In co-funded partnerships, there is no place as a full member for private partners, but we want indeed to reinforce the links with the industry. And of course, they can participate in the stakeholders forum or board, like NGOs, like research organizations. B, they can participate in the co-creation of the strategic research agenda. It is important. C, they can apply for funding in the calls. D, they can participate in the other kind of activities, or they can even be key collaborators or third parties. But there is also an open question about the co-funding, the participation as funders with private money. And in the Commission, we are exploring the possibility of a second phase, not now, but a second phase of the partnership, where private companies who want to sponsor some calls or to provide some funds for particular research can have a sort of co-program partnership on the side. But this is still very early to know. I would say another possibility could be calls, because the partnership can have calls that are co-funded by the Commission with 1/3 of the funds coming from the EU, but it can have other kind of calls separated where private money is more than welcome.
Thanks a lot, Josefina. So I think I need to echo some discussion we have with business private companies right now. And last part of the question regarding the countries. Actually, so the core business, it's the European research area, but it's defined in a large way. That means that it's member states, but it's also associated countries. For instance, you have to know that in Biodiversity, we have already, it's from Norway to Turkey, for instance. It's from Israel to France, and so a broad range of countries, actually. And you have seen that the international dimension is very important. It has been said by John, and so we will take this into account. This means that non-European countries, we are open to discuss with them. So any country is interested, just contact us, even if you are not in Europe. I think it's good to discuss with you. And I've seen also a question directly from somebody from Georgia, for instance. So we are fully open to discuss with your countries. So do not hesitate to contact us. Next question.
There was also a general question related to the fish that were mentioned, that were prepared to present the different partnerships, including the one on biodiversity, to know if these fish are available somewhere, and if yes, where.
Josefina, maybe the 2-page fishes, are there internal tools for the Commission, or are they
Oh, no, the 2 pages can be found I think they can be found at the ERA Learn website, but I would say they are pretty obsolete. Now we have the real document. It's available. It's going to be online in a few days, and there is a short executive summary, and we probably will have to make an even shorter 1 or 2 pager. I would say just wait for a few days and go for the real information. I think it's worth.
Yeah, I fully agree. Because to be concrete, what has been prepared now, it's around 40-page documents for each partnership, and these will be made fully accessible. So it's probably the material you will need to look at, and we will explain it's a material you can use when we will launch the consultation, open consultation.
I understand that the short, like 6 pages executive summary, is going to be published tomorrow with the launch of the EU biodiversity strategy. It's still not confirmed, but if it's not, we can send it anyway.
Okay, so you will not have to wait a lot. Claire, next question.
Yeah, so I think we also have many questions that will be answered a bit later with the rest of the presentation. So I will keep some of them for later on. There was one general question which can maybe also be a link to the next part of the of the webinar on how will the partnership work to reach the long-term goals that were presented and to reach the EU 2050 vision and to support the 2030 research and innovation commitment and to enable transformative changes, putting biodiversity on the path to recovery.
I think it's very close to what Hilda will just say now. So either you have other questions we may address, or otherwise we just jump in with Hilda.
Yeah.
What time is it? It's time?
It's yeah, it's almost time. We should move in 1 minute, and I think it's a good transition. And the other questions are really related to other aspects that will be addressed later.
Then Hilda, the floor is yours, I think. Yeah.
Indeed, so what you see here is like, or the key figure of the partnership, explaining indeed how we aim to reach the 2050 vision. So I will explain this figure basically from the right to the left, because at the right you have indeed 2050 vision, which strongly aligns with what we know from the Convention of Biodiversity, living in harmony with nature. And we have identified 3 long-term goals from 2030 to 2050 that will add up to this vision. The first one is that we hope that this partnership will help to put nature back on a path of recovery, basically addressing all the levels of biodiversity, so genetic level, species and ecosystems. Also that we will help in the development and the deployment of nature-based solutions to contribute to the societal challenges, and also that biodiversity will be seen as the basis for sustainable development, with Europe taking a leadership role. And so we have identified 5 key overarching objectives for the partnership that will allow the partnership to support the contribution of research and innovation to the EU biodiversity strategy. And so these 5 overarching objectives will also help us to reach these long-term goals. I will quickly comment on each of these objectives and then also on the work areas that will make things more concrete. So the first objective of this partnership is that we hope it will lead to a European-wide harmonized and operational biodiversity monitoring system that will be implemented by the member states, with a close link to research and innovation, and also informing policy. So that is the first one. With this first overarching objective, I will maybe already mention, because I think we will get to the question, we do not want to interfere with national monitoring schemes. It will not be prescriptive. The idea is to provide capacity across borders to allow for harmonization of methods and protocols, and also to create some kind of a platform for exchanges between the different types of actors, so that we are not working in silos between, for example, research and innovation actors and policy actors. So that's the first objective. And the second objectives will focus on the production of actionable knowledge on status, on trends, biodiversity dynamics, on the drivers of biodiversity loss, and also synergies and trade-offs, impacts, responses, but also assessing of novel tools for biodiversity conservation and restoration. Then the third objective would be that this partnership helps to build the evidence base for the development and the deployment of nature-based solutions. And here we will mainly focus with this partnership. Well, what will be at the core is what we call nature-based solutions type 1. And these are nature-based solutions where we have little human intervention in the ecosystem. So basically also focusing on conservation and restoration. But possibly we will also focus on what we call nature-based solutions type 2 and 3, where you have more human intervention in the ecosystem. And we hope that we can do that together with other partnerships, such as the one on agroecology and also the one on urban transition, but we will come back to that later. Then the fourth overarching objective is making the business case for biodiversity, because we recognize that that business depends on biodiversity, but that also has an impact. And so we hope to collaborate with key sectors that have an impact on biodiversity, and maybe also with emerging sectors in the field, and contribute to science-based methods to assess that dependency and that impact. And then the last overarching objective is that this partnership will provide science-based support for EU policy making. And here we aim for research and innovation that will help to strengthen the implementation and also the further development of existing policies, but also that it will help to inform and track progress of the targets under the EU biodiversity strategy. And the aim is to do that in collaboration with the Knowledge Center on Biodiversity that will be set up by the European Commission in collaboration with the GRC and also with the European Environmental Agency. So again, we would not do that alone, but we would do that in collaboration with other actors and other tools in the field. And so to make that very concrete, so these are our overarching objectives. So we will have to crystallize that in a work plan. And so we will have identified a portfolio of activities that we cluster in 6 key working areas. And so we'll then later on, we will go into details for each of these working areas, but now I will just summarize for each of them. The first working area will focus on more systemic research and innovation programs, and also improved monitoring schemes to indeed have a better knowledge and data on status, dynamics, trends, drivers, and levers of action. So that's the first working area. Second working area will focus on research and innovation to design and help implement nature-based solutions. And also this working area will focus on private-public collaboration. The third working area will focus on policy support, so linking research and innovation with policy. The fourth working area will focus on internationalization of European research and innovation activities. So for example, this means linking up with other science policy interfacing platforms at the international level, such as the IPES and the IPCC, but also linking up with multilateral environmental agreements, such as the CBD, and also collaborating with countries beyond Europe, also working together with overseas countries. So these are 4 working areas, but then we also have 2 more, which we consider more transversal. The 5th working area focuses on communication, outreach, and capacity building. And the 6th working area, which is also transversal, will focus on stakeholder engagement, which means basically developing strategies for engaging with stakeholders and also for co-production. And we hope to do that across sectors and across different actors. So as I said, we will come back to each of these working areas in detail, because we have developed an intervention logic with the different types of activities, outputs, and impacts. So we can discuss them one by one later on.
We cannot hear you anymore, Hilde. It seems that you are muted. Sorry.
Yeah, should be okay again. Yeah. So what we expect as an outcome for this partnership is indeed a more consistent network of harmonized biodiversity monitoring schemes across Europe. And it has been said before that we hope that this is linked with, that the monitoring schemes are linked with both research and innovation, but also with policy. This partnership will lead to some major scientific breakthroughs on biodiversity status and dynamics, but also that it provides us with tools to cope with the biodiversity crisis, and also that we can link it up with actions on the ground. And for that, we will, for example, also collaborate with the LIFE program. science-based support to the development and the deployment of nature-based solutions in collaboration with other partnerships that are currently being set up. Public-private collaborations to help to have a better accounting and valuation of biodiversity in private sectors. And then last but not least, also that we can provide support to policy making and also, as I said, linkages between research, innovation, monitoring and policy, and also doing that in collaboration with others. Here you can see also an overview of a few partnerships that we have already identified to collaborate with, based basically on the 2-page fiches that we have also, that you can also find on the internet, but we are now more, we have now more detailed discussions with each of them to make the collaborations more concrete. So the ones that we have identified so far include agroecology, water for all, sustainable cities, circular bio-based economy, and also climate neutral, sustainable and productive blue economy. And of course, we will also, with this partnership, we also hope to contribute to the missions that have been identified now under the Horizon Europe. And so far we have identified 4 missions to which this partnership could actually contribute. And as I said, we also hope that we can collaborate with LIFE to make the link with conservation actions on the ground. And we are also assessing to what extent there will be also input from regional and cohesion funds. And last but not least, so before we go into the details of each of the working areas, we want to stress that this partnership really wants to build on existing initiatives. We do not aim to duplicate what is already in place. We want to build on existing initiatives. Some of them have been funded by the European Commission. And so the idea would be to really link up the initiatives and to make sure that we together we can implement this very ambitious program. And so to name a few, and I will come back to that later, are initiatives such as OPLA, Eclipse, mass-related initiatives, but also the multi-stakeholder platform for nature-based solutions. These are just a few that I mentioned, but I really wanted to highlight that we are not doing that in isolation, and also that we want to create synergies between tools that are already existing in the landscape, so to simplify and not to make the whole landscape more complex. I don't know if we take some questions now or whether we just move to the different working areas. I don't know, Xavier, do you want to take the first 2 working areas, or how do you want to proceed?
Actually, it's excellent if you can go on, because meanwhile, I have the opportunity also to respond to a range of questions which can help alleviate the question load then. Okay. If it's okay for you.
Yeah, it's fine. I am also answering questions. I like this system. So later we will have to have a look at the answered one.
All right, that's fine. Okay, so what I will do now is indeed, so it's a lot of text, so I will try to just explain a little bit the logics behind the intervention logic that we have identified for each of the working areas. You may recall that the first working area will focus on knowledge generation and on monitoring. So the key impact that we want to achieve with this first working area is that we have more coherent and harmonized monitoring schemes in Europe, that we have a better knowledge on the actual status, trends and drivers of biodiversity loss, that we can also identify science-based actions to tackle the drivers, and that we can also connect with conservation and with restoration actions on the ground. So that's, I would say, the ultimate impact of this first working area. Now, to make that happen, we have identified what we call inputs. So things that we need to start from, things we will build on to make this happen. The first key input for this will be gathering national and local hubs for monitoring. We recognize that most likely we will see a very heterogeneous landscape, because this is very different for different member states. We will also collaborate with a CSA, a coordination support action that has been put in place also to map what is already existing, to also help the thinking on how we could actually harmonize the monitoring schemes through this partnership. The second input is indeed that we will gather major research and innovation program owners and managers. That's clear. That will be the basis also of the membership of this partnership. And that we will also pool research and innovation investments in support of joint programming. And to make that concrete, we aim for some 6 joint calls over the course of the lifetime of the partnership, with an amplitude of something like 30 million euros cash and 45 million euros total cost. These are, of course, tentative budgets, but that is the amplitude we hope to achieve. And including at least 1 research and innovation program with support of the private sector. Other inputs include that we aim to build on different disciplines, not only natural sciences, but also include social sciences, sociology, economy, geography, law, philosophy, so to really make it very inclusive and also building on different knowledge systems. We will also need input from research infrastructures, from the S3 landscape, especially those that have a very strong link with biodiversity, for example, LifeWatch and LTR, but also the ones that are acting at the global level, like GBIF and GeoBon, and also collaboration with biodiversity synthesis centers will be part of this. As I said, we also hope to collaborate with LIFE, so that will also be one of the inputs. There will be also some engagement with other partnerships to implement this first working area. And then in terms of activities that we foresee for this specific working area is the first activity will be to promote clustering and also to build capacity and provide support and resources for the national and subnational monitoring schemes. So as I said, really reinforcing link with research and innovation, but also with policy and the link with policy. A second activity that we foresee is to further develop the database of research and innovation projects and programs that we currently have under BiodiVERSA, but so we hope to further elaborate this database and further expand it, and also to make a database on research infrastructures. And again, we have started a pilot on that under BiodiVERSA, but we hope to further elaborate on that, building on the S3 roadmap and also in collaboration with others. So again, not to duplicate what is already there, but really building on what is already existing. Also, we aim for foresight activities and identifying emerging issues, because all of this information will help us to develop and update a common vision, a strategic research and innovation agenda amongst all the members of the partnership and also jointly with the European Commission. And so it will be a long-term vision, but then we will make it more concrete and develop annual plans, annual implementation plans, also taking into account knowledge gaps that are identified, for example, under the EPES. Then the fifth activity would be the development of annual joint calls, so being complementing with Horizon Europe, and also some knowledge brokerage activities. So for this working area, I will leave it here. So maybe we can first take some questions before we move to the next working area.
Thank you, Hilde. So first, maybe a question that was also answered in the chat, but I think it's also good if we address it here. It's on the type of a project that can be funded in this partnership, to know if it's only limited to research projects or if it can also be practical, educational, awareness raising projects.
Maybe I can say what I have answered directly. So we will fund a broad range of research projects on a broad range of topics first. Second, the kind of research we will fund, it's research engaging with stakeholders. And in doing so, we expect more impact, but also more outreach from the research within each project funded. And in addition to this, this European partnership on biodiversity plans also to implement a range of communication and outreach activities. So it's one of the two transversal working area. We will not detail too much. Hilde will say a few words, but for all our activities, we have two transversal working areas. One on stakeholder engagement, promoting systematically stakeholder engagement. And the second one is on communication and outreach. So yes, it's important. Only on the education aspect, we have to make choices. The partnership will not be able to make everything. And so we will have probably a limited role regarding education per se. I'm not discussing about the skills of young scientists, etc. We will do things here, but otherwise for children, etc., we have to recognize we will have limited outcome probably.
From Horizon Europe, we want to start a line, and it's indeed very difficult because there are other areas like the Education and Culture Directorate General, but we really want to start moving the education for sustainability and education for biodiversity. We have a pilot now, and we expect to collaborate with the partnership, at least in setting the agenda, what is needed, and then try to reach to the right partners to do that.
Okay, thank you. Then we have many questions, I think, that are related to monitoring. So maybe I can ask you a few. There are questions that are related on how to link the activities that will be implemented in the partnership with the one that might be implemented at the local or national level, and how some activities can be considered as duplicates. Also, what exactly will the biodiversity partnership do in terms of monitoring? If they aim to also fund the monitoring schemes. And then one last question maybe related to monitoring is if these activities related to monitoring will also include activities involving citizen sciences.
I suggest that my colleague Karin Soundberger from DG Environment, who is in the audience, if she is able to answer, she can probably give us a better overview on monitoring activities and what is the aim of DG Environment with this. Is Karin able to be unmuted? Karin, are you there?
Okay, so Karin, you should be able to speak now. If you are muted right now, but if you unmute yourself, you should have the possibility to answer.
So far, it was a 100% success for technology.
In any case, we have included the monitoring activities at the request of DG Environment. In the closing of the webinar, the director, Humberto Delgado, will be explaining, so probably this can be the moment to discuss it a little bit. But yes, citizen science is included, stakeholder involvement in monitoring should be included. I don't know, Xavier, if you want to add more.
Yeah, maybe a few comments. First, the partnership will not be in charge of the monitoring. It will be the actors in charge that we will offer opportunities, offer support, etc. To do what? We will offer opportunities and support to network and harmonize between the monitoring schemes. I've seen the questions when we say monitoring schemes. It's not very, very local monitoring, that is, if you have only a few hectares and you monitor biodiversity on it, it will be hard to consider this as the brain to work with. But I've seen a question on a regional, that is subnational monitoring, or transnational, like I don't know, Alpine or whatever. This is the level we aim at, that is transnational and national, indeed. And to do this, either you have already in some countries kind of network existing and centralization of the data, etc. In many countries, it does not exist, and we have actually a mosaic of schemes. So the objective of the partnership will be to promote the networking, to have the emergence of national monitoring schemes, and moreover, to have a networking between countries. The aim is to have a harmonization between countries, harmonization of the variables to be measured, the methodology to be used, and also the capacity to report regarding some policies, etc. So I hope that you understand the approach. Of course, I've seen also a question on is it possible to have a 100% support for all actors performing monitoring? Probably no, I'm sorry to say, but we will find ways to partly support one way or the other, at least part of your activities, so that at least the situation, we hope, would be much better after a few years than as compared today, where monitoring, it's fragmented. Monitoring, it's very often far from research and innovation activities, not enough support for some kind of activities. So for all these aspects, the way we plan to do this, we will organize a working group gathering the key actors in different countries, the key actors in charge of monitoring, the broad range of activities, monitoring, and listening to them to identify with them what would be the priorities, where you need indeed support, what kind of harmonization we need to promote, what kind of support in some countries, it can be capacity building, etc. So we can, again, to have more details, you can contact us directly, and we will try to have more information to provide to you.
At the ecosystem level, we have also to say that this is supposed to involve, to integrate somehow the MAES initiative, monitoring and mapping and assessment of ecosystems and the services. So this also needs to articulate with the partnership somehow.
Okay, also related to this first working area, there is a question on what will be the link with the research infrastructures in this context.
Yes, I sent also an answer, written answer to this one. We have discussed already with, for instance, LifeWatch, Eric, with LTR representatives. It was in particular in November, so they have actually directly fed us with text, and this has been taken into account in the presentation of the partnership. You will see when the text will be released within 1 week, something like this, that we have an objective clearly on collaborating with them, because the objective, of course, for instance, for developing research, we do expect at least part of the research is to make the best use of existing infrastructures like this. And on the reverse, these ERICS infrastructures, they have indicated to us, if I'm right, I hope I will understand, I will remember, but they have asked also to what extent the partnership could be used as a strategic tool to help them also to find the best place to be very strong European counterpart of international research infrastructures, for instance. So it's two-way dialogue and collaboration with them. So indeed, it's planned. And I've seen another one, another question on GeoBon, which is very linked to this one. And we also plan, of course, to take into account GeoBon and European counterpart for many reasons, because we will not reinvent the wheel. Many work have been made already on essential biodiversity variables and the way we would like to have monitoring for biodiversity, etc. So we will have to build to capitalize on this by engaging these bodies, these initiatives.
Okay, thank you, Xavier. We have a few more questions related as well to the private sector and how they could contribute to calls if they will have the possibility to participate in cash in kind in the calls.
Hilde?
Hilde, do you want to answer this one?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So first of all, when it comes to the joint calls, the modalities of private sector engagement, we still need to work that out and see to what extent this will be possible. But as has been said before, we do hope that we can set up a joint program together with private sector so that we have modalities that allow for that. And in addition, there will be several ways to engage with private sector also through, we will explain it later, but we will have a stakeholder board. So we hope that we also get input like upstream from these type of actors, but also downstream that we can engage with them, either like bilateral collaborations with specific private sector companies, but also through networks such as the Business and Biodiversity platform. So there will be different opportunities in the different streams of work. But when it comes to the joint calls, we still need to identify the modalities. But that will be the same for other co-funded partnerships as well, and see how we can make this happen. But we do have already some ideas of some like flagship programs that we could implement together with business sectors. So we do hope that this will become a reality. And this is also the ambition of the partnership.
Thank you, Hilde. I also think that we have a question which is related more to early career researcher, and if there will be some activities to also unlock opportunities for early career researchers.
As we will show later on, like in the portfolio of activities that we foresee, we indeed foresee to also invest in mobility schemes, for example, to have exchange of young scientists between academia, like between institutes, but also to, for example, engage with private sector. And so also we also foresee some work here. And also, for example, in the context of capacity building and initiatives, we foresee, for example, to collaborate with Alternate, which is the network of research institutes for the summer school. So we see that there is also some room for capacity building when it comes to young scientists. So again, yes, for sure, we will not forget on this. We will not forget this aspect, and we'll try to take it into account in the different streams of work that we foresee.
Xavier, I fully agree. And regarding the question, we can add that fundamentally, the research projects we fund through this kind of partnership, there are opportunities for hiring PhD students and postdoc also. So indeed, it's a scheme completely favorable to unlock PhD and postdoc opportunities. Keep in mind that the PhD and postdocs then they have the opportunity to work very often to collaborate across borders, that is with different countries. So it's good opportunities for them.
Okay, I suggest that we move to the next point on the second working area, because I think we answered most of the question related to the first working area.
Okay. Xavier, do you want me to proceed or you want to take over? Or...
No, it's very fine to me. It's the easy way for me, except if you are fed up.
No. If I'm fed up, I will just log out. So, okay, so for working area 2, as you may recall, this is mainly about supporting the development and the deployment of nature-based solutions, but indeed also private sector engagement. And so the key impacts would be science-based support for nature-based solutions, but also that we, with the partnership, that we help to mainstream biodiversity in some key sectors. So I will again focus on the impacts, on the inputs and on the activities mainly. So for inputs, we foresee collaboration with OPLA, and you may know that OPLA is the EU repository for nature-based solutions. It's like a knowledge marketplace with the latest thinking on natural capital, ecosystem services, and nature-based solutions. So this will help us also to increase uptake of research and innovation if we collaborate with OPLA. We also foresee collaboration with the multi-stakeholder platform for nature-based solutions, which is now called Network Nature. And that will help us to exchange best practices, link up with stakeholders, and also link up with demonstrators. We also foresee collaboration with a third party which has been identified, which is the World Conservation Monitoring Center. For example, when it comes to the development of tools to analyze and show impact and dependency of business on nature. As I said, we also foresee engagement of enterprises from key sectors, especially the ones that will have a strong impact on biodiversity, but also some emerging sectors. And as I said, we also foresee in that context collaboration with the business and biodiversity platform supported by the European Commission. We foresee also engagement with other partnerships that are relevant in the context of nature-based solutions. And here we have identified mainly the one on agroecology and the one on urban transitions. So to focus basically on nature-based solutions in agricultural context, but also in an urban context. And we may also have input from EU executive agencies like EASME, but we still have to detail that a bit further. And then in terms of activities, we foresee implementation of research and innovation programs to support the development of nature-based solutions, but also the assessment of the impacts that these nature-based solutions have. And we also hope to co-design and implement public-private joint actions, taking into account the needs from the private sector from very early on in the research development process. So again, I will leave it here before we can, and I think we can take some questions before moving to the next, because we actually foresee a short technical break after this Q&A round. We can have a short break before we continue with the rest of the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Hilde. I'm looking at the question right now. I don't think we have specific ones related to this particular working area, but there are a few new questions. So
yeah, maybe I see the question of the ERANET core organic regarding the way we plan to interact and collaborate with other partnerships. So what we have screened the different candidate partnerships on the table so far. It has been presented the main partnerships identified for now, for which we think we should collaborate. And what we have proposed is that for the biodiversity domain, we would offer a forum between the different partnerships, possibly also with missions. And this forum would be an arena where we could discuss between different partnerships on the best way to tackle biodiversity issues, either through a given partnership, for instance, through the biodiversity partnership, but in close link with another partnership. It can be also the reverse in another partnership, but articulated with the biodiversity partnership. And as needed through joint actions, joint activities. So you see this forum will be the occasion to share our vision, the different trias, strategic agenda, roadmaps of partnerships, identify the areas of common interest, possible activities of common interest, and when it makes sense, prepare joint activities. So we have advanced quite well with some partnerships. For instance, we had several meetings already with a partnership on urban transition, because they are highly interested in working on urban biodiversity and nature-based solutions, for instance. We are less developed maybe for other partnerships, for instance, the agroecology one, just because of the timing, as they are less advanced maybe due to their own timing. But we consider it's also very important. So you see, it will be through this kind of dialogue, strategic dialogue, leading to kind of roadmap, joint roadmap between partnerships when it makes sense. The objective is really to make sure that the crossroad, and I am pretty sure for EC people it's very important, the crossroad between different domains. We don't want silos. We want articulated articulation between the different partnerships and missions.
Thank you, Xavier. In the meantime, we received another question, which is related on the activities plan on nature-based solutions, to have a bit more information on the expected partners for this activities, and how important participative stakeholder engagement will be required.
Hilde, maybe?
Well, I think it depends on the type of activities we're talking about. If it is really focusing, I mean, there will be several activities that will reinforce stakeholder engagement in the in the context of the partnership. So we will have inputs through a stakeholder board. But of course, we will also, so that's actually at the level of the partnership itself. But what we do hope is that with the partnership, we also help to reinforce the capacity of the scientists themselves to engage with stakeholders in their projects to develop and deploy nature-based solutions. So the engagement of stakeholders when it comes to nature-based solutions will both be at the level of the partnership, but also at the level of the individual projects. And then, as I said, we hope to work together with initiatives like, for example, Network Nature, which is the multi-stakeholder platform on nature-based solutions, where they also showcase, for example, demonstrators of nature-based solutions where you can have exchange of best practices. So there are already, we know that there are already actors in the field that work on nature-based solutions with different mandates. So we will see how the partnership can actually complement that, but really with a focus on research and innovation. And the third working area that I will briefly explain now is focusing basically on the policy support part of the partnership. And the key impact of this working area is that we hope that there will be better uptake of knowledge and of innovation by policy stakeholders on biodiversity, that also there will be more efficient use of the knowledge that comes from the biodiversity monitoring schemes by policymakers, and that overall we can have better and more efficient policy making and also implementation. So as inputs for this specific working area, we see involvement of research and innovation policymakers, research and innovation also program managers, biodiversity policymakers, and environmental protection agencies. So we hope that, as we explained, that this partnership will also help to increase interactions between the different types of actors at the national and subnational level. We also foresee inputs of existing initiatives, like, for example, MAS, the Mapping and Assessment of Ecosystem Services, KIP-INCA, Maya, initiatives like We Value Nature, so initiatives that have already begun to provide guidance on mapping and assessment of ecosystem services and on natural capital accounting. And also, for example, Move and Move On that focus on the overseas. We also foresee inputs from Eclipse, which is a knowledge mechanism on biodiversity and ecosystem services that already exists for quite a few years. That will help us also for science policy interfacing activities and for knowledge assessments. But we also foresee collaborations with boundary organizations, for example, with the Institute of European Environmental Policy or with the ICN European Regional Office in Brussels. So we do foresee also collaboration with other types of stakeholders, boundary organizations in that context. And the last one would be that we engage with the newly established or to be established European Knowledge Center on Biodiversity. So if you see the biodiversity strategy tomorrow, you will see also that this knowledge center on biodiversity is identified as a key body to help with the implementation of the biodiversity strategy and also to help track progress of the strategy. And then in terms of activities, what we foresee there is to reinforce the knowledge basis on very important policy issues with co-design between the different types of actors. Also promote, as I said, and as we mentioned several times, cooperation between monitoring schemes, research and innovation, and also the Knowledge Center on Biodiversity in collaboration with MAS, and also reinforce the science policy interface to support policy making, to also support the implementation of policies, but also to help track progress in the new targets under the EU biodiversity strategy. I don't know if you have any questions on this working area. We can take them before moving to the next one.
Yeah, thank you, Hilde. Maybe a kind of a general question that was asked also previously on the fact that the biodiversity policy implementation depends on actions by policy sectors and notably agriculture and fisheries. And so there was a question to know if the science supports will also extend to decision makers in these sectors in the context of the partnership.
Well, there are several ways how these ministries could be involved. So they would not be, well, we foresee that we would have collaborations with them through other partnerships where they would be full members. For example, with ministries of agriculture, we could foresee that we have collaborations with them when we collaborate with the partnership on agroecology, for example. So that is one way to do it. We could foresee that there may be activities in the context of the biodiversity partnership where we will need to collaborate with this type of ministries. So it could also be that there are some activities in the context of our partnership where we will have engagement with these ministries. And then the third way to have also interactions with them would be that we foresee that the biodiversity partnership will also link up with national mirror groups where you have different types of actors and different types of ministries involved. So through these national hubs, we also foresee that we will have exchanges with these type of ministries. So they will maybe not be full part of as a member of the partnership, but the same applies, for example, with health ministries. But there will be several ways to collaborate with them at different levels. But maybe Xavier, you want to supplement?
I fully agree with this. Maybe just to build on this, we have the equivalent at the European level as compared to the national level. So it is at the European level. You have mostly DG Research Innovation and DG Environment being completely in the co-design of this partnership. But it is planned that we will work with other DGs also. And for this, this will likely be done through a steering committee of the partnership. Again, we will explain when presenting the governance. In this steering committee, you will have DG Env, DG Research, but also other DGs, all DGs relevant for environmental issues. So it's really the equivalent. So it's a balance, a trade-off between we need a governance efficient enough, etc. So that's why we cannot have all ministries on board. But because we know biodiversity, it's a cross-sectorial issue, we will have approaches to engage different sectors and different ministries, indeed, or DGs.
I want to add, and I try to answer by writing, that we expect the outcomes from the research made in the partnership to serve the policies and not only environmental ministries or research policies, but the fact that you will have this eclipse mechanism and other kinds of science policy mechanism like BiodiVERsA now means that your policy briefings can be applied for fisheries, agriculture, and we expect this to happen.
Thank you.
And they can use it. They can ask questions.
Okay. Thank you, Josefina. And your answer is also related to another question that we received on how the partnership will link up with the current and new European regulation, such as the Common Agricultural Policy, and also new regional or national policies or strategic plans.
I don't know. It's probably too early to know that, but we encourage all kind of synergies, and as Xavier mentioned, the dialogue with other partnerships and with other policymakers.
Yeah, we also know that the implementation of these new policies and existing policies, it will require efficient cooperation between the EU and the member states. And so we hope that the partnership could be a tool to do that. Not only for example, the implementation of the EU Birds and Habitats Directive or other environmental related legislation, but also for the commitments towards the CBD, the Convention of Biodiversity, so that we actually provide a way to coordinate and to collaborate between EU and member states and to work at scale. But indeed, we will also have to see how the biodiversity strategy looks like and what the priority areas will be, and then identify in our strategic research and innovation agenda how we could actually help to support the different elements in the EU biodiversity strategy. And then when it comes, for example, to the farm to fork strategy, that will be most likely in collaboration with other partnerships, or it will be the mandate of other partnerships to support that. But where there will be synergies between or like overlapping areas, that will also be the area where the partnerships will collaborate. The same for example, the blue economy. We will do that in collaboration with the partnership that will tackle that.
Yes, and the timing is excellent because we will have this EU biodiversity strategy guiding us and us doing the strategic agenda together. So the Horizon Europe agenda and the partnership agenda can actually be modeled to serve this policy. As for the farm to fork, of course, there are other partnerships that are more into the core business, but collaboration will be needed. There is the food systems, and there are a few more in the production side.
Yes, that's maybe something that if people read the full proposal as it currently stands, maybe the link with policies and different areas of work also with the EU biodiversity strategy is not that well elaborated yet. But when we come to develop the strategic research and innovation agenda, we will make clear that priority areas are well covered, and that we see that well reflected in our long-term vision.
Thank you, Hilde. I think we can move to the working area 4 because there is no more question for the moment.
Okay, so for working area 4, so the keyword here would be internationalization. So with this working area, we hope that we can strengthen the role of Europe as a global actor for biodiversity research, that we also have research and innovation in support of the SDGs, but also in support of other science policy interfacing initiatives, and also in support of conventions to the extent possible. And also we hope that we will have support to the overseas, so the overseas regions and countries and territories. So we also foresee collaboration there. So when it comes to inputs, we foresee engagement with non-ERA countries, including for joint calls. So that will be could be decided on an ad hoc basis. We also foresee collaboration with the IPBES across the 4 functions of IPBES, which are the knowledge, the assessment of the knowledge generation, policy support, and capacity building. If you are interested in what we have done so far in collaboration with the IPBES, we have actually produced recently a brochure to explain a bit how we see the collaboration with IPBES and what we have done so far. But maybe also good for you to know that BiodiVERSA is currently hosting also the technical support unit for knowledge generation for IPBES. So we have a very good connection with IPBES, also I would say at a very practical level. So in the identification of knowledge gaps from the different assessments, we can immediately take that up in the partnership. We also foresee engagement with international initiatives and networks such as Future Earth, UNEP, WCMC, but also ICN and others, and also with research infrastructures, including at the global level. So we already mentioned a few, and also with conventions, and mainly with the scientific bodies of the convention. So we will see how we can actually also contribute there. And then when it comes to the actual activities, we foresee mapping of international collaborations between scientists from the European research area and other regions for some priority topics. And we have already started to do that in the context of BiodiVERSA. For example, on biodiversity scenarios, we will now also do that for the biodiversity and climate change interlinkages. So we already have some capacity for this type of exercises that we can build on. We also hope to create capacity for member states to engage in IPBES without interfering with the national, I would say with national focal points of IPBES, but really create some capacity and a better understanding of what IPBES can actually achieve and what it means also in the current context of the biodiversity crisis. And maybe also think about some capacity building activities in this respect. Maybe also mobilizing new members for IPBES. And then also implementing research and innovation programs that will fill knowledge gaps identified by both, as I said, the IPBES, but also some scientific bodies of the conventions, like, for example, the SUBSTA of the CBD. And also the last activity would be that we foster linkages between biodiversity research infrastructures at the global scale with their European counterparts. So that is also part of this working area. Any questions on this one?
There are no particularly new questions. We had a former one on what will be the link and the connections between the partnership and IPES and CBD. I think you partly answered by presenting this working area.
Yes, and as I said, and maybe after the webinar, we will send you an email with information where you can find the webinar in a recorded format, but also with a few other documentations, and we can maybe also include that so that people can see how we have collaborated already in the context of Biodiversity with the IPES across the 4 functions, because we will build on this type of collaboration also for the partnership. So it's not something that is quite vague for IPES, it's actually very concrete. In the context of the CBD, it's a bit less concrete, but we will see how we can actually contribute to the thinking, and also, indeed, as I said, see to what extent we can do some activities in the context of the substa, maybe some side events.
Okay, thank you, Hilde. So I think as we do not have new questions, I think we can move to the next part.
Okay. So we come to the 2 last working areas, which, as we said, are like more transversal across the whole partnership. There's a working area that will focus on stakeholder engagement. And here we aim to build capacity for the research community to engage with stakeholders, but actually also for stakeholders to engage with the research community, so both ways. And we could do that by providing guidance documents. You may know that Biodiversity has already developed a stakeholder engagement handbook and also a policy impact handbook. So we will continue developing guidance documents, workshops, and also some trainings. Then also with regard to stakeholder engagement, and we will explain that a bit later also, we aim to set up an advisory board and an enlarged stakeholder board that will allow us to engage in the different activities of the partnership, both upstream and downstream. And we also hope to promote citizen science activities and also fund citizen science projects. So that is something that we would also do, again, not like in isolation, but we know that there is, for example, the European Citizen Science Association and other bodies active in the context of citizen science, with whom we would collaborate for this specific part. So that is for stakeholder engagement. And then for communication, also transversal. One of the things we hope to achieve is some kind of like an e-platform for the era on biodiversity, explaining what the role of research and innovation could be for protection, restoration, and also for sustainable management of biodiversity, showcasing added value of the impacts of the partnership to the research community and to research organizations, but also to policymakers, to NGOs, to citizens, and to business actors. So that's also part of this whole communication package. And that would basically be, for example, working on success stories, developing some communication tools like movies, and these type of concrete deliverables. In the context of capacity building, we mentioned already that we hope to train young scientists through webinars or through summer schools, again in collaboration with existing initiatives that already do this type of work. Not unimportant, we will also promote open science principles within the biodiversity research community. We have already started to do that under BiodiVERSA. So we will continue to work on that by developing guidance tools, by helping scientists to develop data management plans, and that sort of things. And then the last thing, like type of activity that we foresee for this working area is to set up a collaboration between the research and innovation community and the media. and to make sure that we can also contribute to awareness of the biodiversity crisis. But also knowing, I mean, we also see that there are other actors in the field that play a role here in the whole process of awareness creation. But we think that we could do something by reinforcing the link with the media and with the research community. So we will also try to establish a few initiatives to support that. I can maybe stop here for this.
Thank you, Hilde. So we had a few more questions. Most of them were already answered in the chat because we're very efficient. So there was one question which is maybe not completely related to this part of the presentation, but to know if scenarios and modeling will also be covered in the context of this partnership.
Well, it will be. It's more like what we will explain later is that we will identify. In the context, over the duration of the partnership, we will identify flagship programs. So that could be part of a topic to identify and to further build on what we have been funding in the past in the context of biodiversity scenarios. So it would be part of the work indeed.
Thank you. And we have a question which is related to the calls that will be launched in the context of the partnership. To know if one of the conditions to participate in the call is to have the country of the applicants participating in the partnership and contributing to the call.
Yeah, I can take this one. So yes, indeed, the idea is that for researchers, for instance, to participate to a joint call, joint mean between countries. And when it's a co-funded call, this means that you have sources from different countries and the EC. I think that if I see the name, I'm not sure if I see the name of the requester, it could come from Italy. And you just have to know that then if you are from Italy, we have ongoing discussion with Italy, which was not on board by Biodiversity now, but we hope they may be, we don't know, but they may be a member of the partnership at the end. So if this is the case, it can ease you. But when you state that it's not the logic of the European Union, I think it's the European Union, all countries participate at the end to also financially. So I think it's logic to make sure that indeed as a country realizes it's important to be on board to allow its own research community and stakeholders to fully be part of these joint transnational initiatives. So I hope the answer is good news at the end.
From the Commission, we would like all member states to be represented, as many associated countries to be represented, and not only the research funders, but also the environmental ministries, even if they don't put in cash, they can put in kind, they can contribute to the strategic agenda. But about the EU principle, we do have the calls in Horizon Europe, well, Horizon 2020, and will be Horizon Europe next year, and there all countries can participate.
I fully agree, Josefina, but I want to stress that this is due to the fact that all countries participate at the European level. And so I think the same logic apply at the end to this kind of tool. It's normal. And I think that the answer was clear for you, so I'm happy that it's the case.
Thank you. So coming back, so it's not related to the slide that was just presented, but coming back to the biodiversity monitoring activities, there is a question to know if there is some rooms for the establishment of new international networks, so not only in the EU, but also with, for example, the USA or other developing countries.
Maybe what I would like to say then, we would avoid to develop new things before really looking at what exists. So the first thing is really to look at what exists already. If you have already initiatives like GeoBone or others, then we have to take this into account. So it will be more reinforcement of the many monitoring schemes that exist. Still, I agree that we have a lot of work, additional work to reinforce these transnational networks on biodiversity monitoring. So we will start with a priority within Europe, but I agree with the person that we will have very early to think beyond Europe. And so in particular, in terms of harmonization, it would be a pity not to think very early about things at the international dimension. I was talking about the essential biodiversity variables, for instance, which has emerged at the international level, things like this. So, so you see the message. We will take into account what exists already. We will take into account the international dimension, not only the European one. And for harmonization, this is key. But the main target is Europe for now.
I saw a question about how can stakeholders join the board, and I think that would be nice to discuss in here because I know you are.
Yeah, it's just the next slide. Yeah.
Okay, so then I suggest that we move indeed to the next part.
Okay, and then we will have to answer Oliver. I've seen that one of the partners of the partnership has asked a question, but we can start if you want by the governance, because many questions are linked to this. So we hope it can enlighten a bit you. So you see a scheme for the envisaged governance, but it's still under discussion on some aspects. Governance for this European partnership. Keep in mind that some aspects will be, I would say, defined for in a generic manner for European co-funded partnerships, more general than for the Biodiversity Partnership. So as you can see in the middle, you have, strictly speaking, the European Partnership Consortium. That is the full members we were talking about. So keep in mind, it's again, ministries of research and of environment, EPAs and agencies, depending on relevant agencies, depending on ministries of environment, research funders, funding agencies, foundation. So this is the consortium per se. And they constitute the General Assembly of the consortium. And to avoid bias, depending on the number of organizations per country, we will normalize to some extent. And for now, it seems that we would have the same voice for small and large countries, because we aim at co-designing things, so reaching consensus, etc. And maybe a novelty as compared to BiodiVERsA is that the chair of our advisory board and representatives of stakeholder colleges, we will discuss this, will be able to attend as advisors the General Assembly. So it reinforces the link to stakeholders here. So the General Assembly will be the deciding decision-making body of the partnership, and well, in particular for elaborating the work plan. And this will involve very strong link with EC services. Part of the General Assembly, part of the partners will constitute an executive board, because we envisage we may have something like 60 partners. We don't know yet, but probably a quite large board, a bit larger than in BiodiVERsA. And so the executive board will be composed of the leaders and co-leaders of the pillars, the 4 working areas presented by Hilde, plus 2 representatives per se from the General Assembly. So it will be to manage the consortium activities. We will have a coordination team composed of a chair and 2 vice chairs also. And I will explain how we will implement our activities, but we aim at implementing 1 joint call co-funded per year. And for each joint call, we will have an a la carte approach. And so all the funders interested to co-fund the call will constitute a call steering committee. And they will be in charge of developing and implementing these calls. So this is one aspect. Then on the right, you see that there will be a steering committee. So we would have national representatives here and representatives of different DG from the Commission, different DGs. And this steering committee so will steer, but will also have a key role in particular for deciding, making sure what kind of activities can be co-funded by the European Commission. So it will be a key committee for the dialogue between countries and the European Commission, even if its composition and function are not really well defined for now. Then we have in gray the operational team, what is called secretariat in some partnerships. And here we have a very important engine of the partnerships, that is people working most often full-time for the partnership. Many of them, they are paid by the partnership, and so they are taking care of many aspects of the work, not only financial, administrative, but also support to activities and to the executive board, coordination team, and all members, etc. So it's a very important aspect, and I can say this with Claire just in front of me here. And then we have third parties, collaborators, etc. And we envisage in some cases to have also the possibility to subcontract some collaborators with a clear added value for the partnership. And then you see at the bottom, we have an advisory board composed of scientists and stakeholders. So this is to promote the dialogue between academia and non-academic stakeholders. And I'm not sure if you see well, because on my screen it's a bit cut, but below in light orange, you have an enlarged stakeholder board. And for this one, we will launch a call. So before, just when we will set up the partnership, we will launch an open call to invite relevant stakeholders. So of course, it will be difficult to accept all very, very local stakeholders, but relevant stakeholders from NGOs to businesses, from science policy interfaces, for instance, to farming organization, forestry actors, etc., etc. So a broad range of stakeholders will be considered. And the intention is to have at least an annual meeting. So it will be the occasion to give information to all stakeholders on the partnerships, the partnership activities, not only the past activities, but also discuss the forthcoming activities, to get feedback from stakeholders so that they can also contribute to shaping the work plan of the partnership. And as you can see, I hope you can see, we will have different colleges in this enlarged board. So we are defining these colleges, but it's something like 5 colleges, topical colleges, and they will elect a representative from each college, and these representatives will be the stakeholders on board the advisory board. By doing so, there will be kind of representation of stakeholders for the advisory board. The advisory board will meet not annually, it will be more frequent meetings. The advisory board will interact well in advance to shape the strategic plan of the partnership. You see also that they will have the opportunity to be advisors attending to General Assembly meetings. And by doing so, these representatives will also be in a position to report regularly to the stakeholders from their college. So we hope by doing so to reinforce further the link between stakeholders and the partnership. So this means that to be part of, you will just have to answer the call, open call we will make when setting up the advisory board and large stakeholder board. And keep in mind also that if you have particular interest in some aspect, you can also directly, in a bilateral way, approach the partnership to discuss the possibility to have a stronger collaboration. It's also possible. Is it clear enough? Maybe it would be good to open the floor to collaboration, possibly if you have question. I see one question, right? Claire, you are muted, Claire. Claire, you are muted.
Sorry. There is one question to know if it will be possible to be part of the stakeholder board and still be able to apply for funding in the research projects.
No, yes, the idea is that the advisory board should and will work on the overall strategy. And we will make sure that, for instance, their work stops just before working really on the details of call topics, call text, etc. So the approach is that scientists and stakeholders actually participating to the life of the partnership in a general manner or on the overall strategy, etc., different activities, as long as they do not work, strictly speaking, on the details, for instance, of call text, etc., there is no difficulty for them to then participate to calls. I will not answer for stakeholders or scientists who would collaborate, help us to elaborate the text of calls, because we may decide to have restriction here. We have not decided yet. Yeah.
Thank you, Xavier. Also, I think there are some questions related to the 5 colleges we mentioned, because on the slide we cannot see the last part of the figure with the colleges. So I don't know.
Can you Hilde, decrease a bit, or it's too tricky to do this? Otherwise, Claire, I propose that you maybe list the colleges so that people can have a better view on the different colleges we are talking about.
So in any case, I think the 5 colleges are not mentioned in the slide, so I'll just have to.
Okay, meanwhile, I will answer a question from BirdLife. Indeed, the term scientist is probably not the best one. We should use academia, because we do recognize that, for instance, on board NGOs and also in business R&D departments, etc., we do have scientists. So keep in mind, you should read academia.
Okay, and so meanwhile, I can give you the name of the 5 colleges that will be represented in the enlarged stakeholder board. So the first one will be on habitat, species, and nature conservation. The second one will be related to economic and industrial activities. The third one related to the relations with the public. The fourth college will be related to wild and domestic genetic resources, and the fifth one will include boundary organizations.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Then I will answer maybe there is one on the number of co-funded calls we plan, that is annual co-funded calls. And the question more or less is it's a lot of work. How will you do this? And the answer is relatively easy. We are doing this already in BiodivERsA. That is, in BiodivERsA, we are launching calls, and more with the EC, we are launching co-funded calls every year. So we have defined already an efficient mechanics that allows us to do so. And we have demonstrated it's working well. So I hope it answers. Claire, I let you the floor.
There is also a question to clarify what boundary organizations are.
Hilde?
The best way to explain it is maybe to give you an example. So boundary organizations, we consider these organizations that also make bridges between different types of actors. For example, a boundary organization could be IUCN, the International Union of the Conservation of Nature. That is basically a membership organization, but with members being governments, NGOs, and also indigenous peoples organizations. So different types of members connected in this type of organizations, and that also make the bridge between, for example, actions on the ground, science and policy. So it's not exactly the same as science policy interfacing platforms, but more organizations that build bridges between different types of members, stakeholders, and communities. That's how I see it, but yeah, the exact definition, I don't know how to.
Maybe also for having the definition we give in BiodivERsA, for instance, you can have a look at the publication we have made, I would say 2 years ago. It's a policy guide we have developed in BiodivERsA to help scientists to engage policy stakeholders. And in it, we have one category, which is boundary organizations, and you have many examples and a definition here. So it's one way maybe to, you can download this brochure on the BiodivERsA website. You type BiodivERsA policy guide and you will find it.
Maybe another question related to governance is to know if you could detail a bit the difference between the steering committee and the General Assembly.
Okay, I can begin and then I will let the floor to Josefina. The way I see this, well, I think it's more or less this, and the details are not here, but the General Assembly is composed, as you have understood, by the members we are talking about, national, subnational actors, decision-making body for what? For proposing a work plan, and deciding also jointly how these actors will jointly work, for instance, decide to launch a joint calls, etc. So this is at this level. It should not be decoupled from EC services. I think it should be made all this work and the decisions should be prepared, there is a need for a work in closely with the European Commission. Still, the barycenter of the General Assembly, it's really the joint decision between national, subnational actors. The steering committee will be the key place for deciding for European Commission and the different DGs. And as I said, for instance, when it comes to the decision that the European Commission will support and will co-fund some activities, of course, it will be at this level. What we are currently working with the European Commission services to make sure that we avoid a divide between two poles, one with the barycenter on countries, one on the European Commission, and to make sure that the functionality and finally the governance leads to a lot of fluidity between the European and national levels. But you see, a priori, the colors of these two bodies. Josefina, I'll let you with maybe more details on this.
Yes, I was trying to answer by writing, but basically you explained it very well. In the General Assembly, all members are there, but the European Commission will only have a role of observer because we cannot be members of the partnership. But this is a partnership between the EU and the member states. So the steering committee is where the EU and the member states sit together. But of course, it's not to validate the results from the General Assembly. We will have to work together in this co-creation process. It's the only body where the EC can participate. Possibly the advisory board too, that this we will have to discuss.
Okay, thank you. Then we have a question to know if the relations with the other partnerships and initiatives will be covered in the governance. And also another question related to the link with other partnership, to know if it could be useful to also link up with the HERA community working on humanities.
This is addressed to me. I don't know the HERA community, but this sounds super relevant, especially for the transformative change. I would say this community should possibly engage with us, with both with the Commission and with the partnership, and see if we can do activities together. Because for transformational change, and if we want to address the indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, we will need humanities. What do you think, Xavier?
Yeah, so for this one, and I say hello to Oliver. For this one, so I fully agree that we do need to mobilize social sciences and humanities, that's for sure. But to be clear, for me, when we say biodiversity research community, we are not talking only about biologists and ecologists. It is, for me, biodiversity research community. It includes a range of social scientists. It can be sociology, philosophy, anthropology. It can be economists also, geographers, etc., etc. And if you see the track record actually of BiodivERsA, we are mobilizing them. But the problem is, so I agree with Oliver that maybe we could use existing initiatives that would help us to mobilize better, and maybe to mobilize some of these actors that are not used to work on biodiversity issues for now, but have skills interesting for biodiversity. But just to be sure that for us, we do not define our the research pool we want to support and promote. They are not only biologists and ecologists, for sure. Regarding to the question of Heather, hello Heather, it's not on the graph indeed, but I've said that we would try to organize a forum for all biodiversity issues with different partnerships, relevant partnerships. And so it's not on the graph, but this would be the way to do this. And it's not on the graph because it's not a body, strictly speaking, of the governance. It's more a forum to promote the dialogue between the different partnerships, possibly missions, relevant for, particularly relevant for biodiversity. So I hope it answers.
Okay, thank you, Xavier. I think we answered most of the questions related to the governance aspect. We had one last question from Oliver to know if the partnership and the learning journey within the partnership will allow to reconnect the fieldwork and the demonstration with the research and how this approach will be useful to connect stakeholders, policymakers, and scientists.
Well, at this stage, I could say that, as presented by Hilde, we will promote stakeholder engagement, and there are many ways to do this. So what Oliver proposes, it's among the possibilities to do this. And regarding demonstrators, for now, what we have identified is that we have a few candidate partnerships strongly relying on demonstrators. This includes the one on urban transition, for instance. This includes also the agroecology partnership. And so in this case, we will not reinvent the wheel. The idea is more to engage collaboration with them and make the best use of the demonstrators they have for promoting biodiversity issues, working on biodiversity issues in this context. So this is something we will have to further discuss with them, of course. We have discussed this quite a lot with the urban transition partnership, and it seems that we could work like this with them. So, so the answer is yes, it's important. The way to do this, we will have to be clever. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Xavier. I think this was the last question, so I suggest to move to the next part.
Okay, so more quickly, the way to implement the activities we are talking about. So we have a broad range of possible activities we can develop. And so we'll have to develop a common vision and to produce a strategic research agenda. This will have to be made for the first one next semester. And then we will establish annual implementation plans, co-design between countries, stakeholders, and the EC. We have the possibility to implement joint calls for supporting research. Keep in mind that when we say research, it can be collaborative research. It can be also synthesis research. For those who know, the kind of stuff made by the NCs or NCENT or SDiv centers. Then we can implement mobility schemes. We can have a range of activities using infrastructures, observatories, and demonstrators, it has been said. This will be particularly relevant for monitoring. We can have activities to promote citizen science. We have building capacity building activities for a broad range of aspects. All the activities linked to the transfer of knowledge, communication, etc. A broad range of activities to ensure support to policy making. Also awareness raising activities. the promotion of international collaboration, and also mapping and foresight activities. So you see a broad range when we look at this portfolio of activities. The way to implement this, we will not implement this in parallel in silos. Next slide. What we will do, we will define in our work program, flagship programs. That is, we will agree on key issues where we would like the partnership to make a difference. And according to the topic of the flagship program, we would mobilize the adequate activities in a systemic, holistic manner to make sure at the end that we reach impact. That is, we actually make the difference for the issue defined for the flagship program. So next slide, Claire. Okay, and of course, this has to be consistent with the overarching objectives of the partnership. And so concretely, we have defined a procedure that is each year we will propose possible topics for the flagship programs. So it's proposed by members of the General Assembly, but we will take into account the view of the advisory board. So this means inputs from stakeholders. We will also have inputs from EC services, etc. And we will have a portfolio of candidate flagship program topics. Not only the topics, but the rationale why we think it's important. And then we will establish priority groups for these flagship programs. And among the top priority group, we will, after amending and selecting the topics, we will be in position to select 1 or 2 flagship programs per year. Only 1 including a joint call, because we cannot implement 2 joint calls at the same time, the same year. But some flagship programs, they can have no joint call included in the flagship program. It's possible. And so year after year, we will be in a position to have a work plan. Of course, we can have a visibility. That is, we can have different flagship programs for year N+1, N+2, but it will be refreshed every year. So this makes the tool, I would say, sufficiently mobile and to be able to capture, I don't know if you have emerging issues, hot topics for policy making, etc. The partnership will be able to adjust the work plan quite quickly. And so every year we will launch these flagship programs, and possibly the joint call will be implemented. And as I told you, it will be implemented then by the call steering committee, that is the funders of the call, which includes the EC, of course, because they co-fund. Okay, so this is the mechanics, and I hope you see it's a way to be sure that we have a co-design. We reach also a critical mass, because for some reason, sometimes you have good ideas a priori, but when you see who would like to implement, to be part of, you have nearly nobody. So then you have to realize it's not so great idea if you don't have them on board. Okay, so this is for this slide, Claire. I think we can move.
Maybe just a question really related to this slide. And when do you foresee the process to select the first flagship topics to start?
Yeah, indeed. BirdLife. Well, to answer you, we will likely begin to work on this after September, and likely before submitting a partnership text to the EC, which could be early 2021. And why? Because it would be a good way for the members of the partnership to have a bit more concrete idea about what we could implement during the first year of the partnership. Okay, and the last slides about the partnership, it's a budget. So the budget is not per se for the budget, it's more because we are talking, and John Bell was talking about the ambition, for instance, of the partnership. It makes sense only if you have a minimum level of resources, of course. So far, even if the figures can change, because we are in a phase where the members are now declaring interest, and also they are declaring possible resources to be invested in the partnership. But you see the figure on the left. For now, we are close to 4 million euros. And this includes in cash for research funding. We also have in kind for research funding, but this is not eligible for top-up for the EC money. Then we have biodiversity monitoring schemes with an amount close to 100 million. Again, it's a tentative amount and it can be adjusted according to the feedback we will receive from countries. And finally, budget for other activities, which is 27 million. So in total, keep in mind a bit less than 4 million euros. How does it compare to what we made in the past? You have on the right the progression of the, for instance, only for funding research. And you see that for this part, it's a bit strange. Okay, I see. Okay. So it's in kind, in cash. So you have to add the red and the hatch red on the left, and then you can see the progression between so this partnership as compared to phase 1, 2, and 3 for Biodiversity. So I think it's relatively clear that there is higher ambition, even if we have 6 goals here planned. But still, it's very clear that we have more ambition here. And then the next slide, Hilde presented the partnership in terms of working areas, you remember. And here you have the presentation of the budget per working area. I will not detail too much how we obtain this, but keep in mind that you see more or less 1/3 it's for working area 1 to promote better knowledge on biodiversity dynamics, etc. A bit less 1/3 for monitoring also. So it's the second part of the working area 1. And then working area 2, you remember it's nature-based solution aspects. It's close to 10%. Also for working area 3, which is for policy support. And working area 4, internationalization, it's close to 10%. And then we have stakeholder engagement, communication and outreach. And finally, management and coordination. By the way, you see that management coordination, it's only 2% of the total cost, which is very reasonable, I hope. And of course, the actual figure distribution between working area, it will depend a lot on the decision that is the topics of flagship programs, because some flagship program will correspond very strongly to nature-based solution working area, for instance. Others can be highly relevant for policy support or for monitoring. So the exact distribution will finally be obtained according to the decision from the members in terms of flagship program. Okay, I think it's close to the end for me. Do we have questions regarding governance, budget, etc.?
No, we do not have specific questions on this, only a question on where exactly we can find the title and to what the different working area refers to.
I thought we had inserted subtitles, but again, you will find it's a bit frustrating. Tomorrow, Josefina told us, tomorrow you should have a 6 or 4 pager presenting the partnership available. And in 1 week, you will have the whole partnership text available. So at EC level and Biodiversity level, we will announce this, and you will find actually all the figures here, for instance, for the budget, the presentation, detailed presentation of the working areas, etc. You will find this in the doc. And when we will launch this, we will open a consultation, allowing all stakeholders, including academia, non-academic stakeholders, etc., to receive maybe in a more detailed way your feedbacks. And we will be in a position to take into account your feedbacks to refine the partnership if needed.
And then maybe 2 last quick questions before moving to the next part on the next steps. How many years does this budget cover? And one question related to the communication activities, and to know if the resources planned are sufficient to reach the impact expected.
Either do you want or somebody else?
So in terms of duration of the partnership, we hope that it can start in 2022 and that it will last until 2028. So for this phase of the partnership. And then in terms of communication, we are mindful of that. Indeed, we received that comment already in November. So we have already increased resources that we foresee for that. But as we also mentioned, it will be these working areas, stakeholder engagement and communication will be transversal across all the working areas. So there will be other elements in each of the working areas that will also tackle issues of stakeholder engagement and communication. So in the end, the total budget envelope that will be allocated to communication will be will probably be higher. And in addition, we also mentioned that we would work in collaboration with existing bodies. For example, OPLA, that will also help us to increase visibility of the achievements of the partnership. So we will also collaborate with other actors to give proper visibility to what the partnership is achieving. But I think it's we are mindful that this is something that we need to carefully reflect on and to see whether this is indeed sufficient. And we are aware that communication is a key also in terms of achieving what we aim for. So yeah.
I want to point out that we are talking about a huge budget of almost 400 million euro. So 1% of 400 million euro is not a small quantity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also we have revised actually the figures. We had a further look because the communication is made at the level of the partnership and at the level of the funded project also. And Frédéric Lemaitre, the officer in charge of science society, science policy interfacing in BiodivERsA, has further evaluated the amount of resources allocated to stakeholder engagement, but also to communication and outreach at the level of funded projects. And actually, in the current figures we have right now, we have a bit underestimated the actual amount devoted to this. So this means that at the end, the figures will be a bit higher. But I concur with Josefina. I think it would be a 10 million euro. Okay, you can't do a lot with this 1%. With 400 million, it's not the same story. And I've seen a message regarding a flagship program. I know it's a bit, well, it's not so easy. I will take 1 or 2 examples. One example of flagship, I don't know at all what will be made, but let's say if the partners would decide to have a large flagship program on biodiversity monitoring. Such a flagship program, they could decide the flagship program to start very early, to last 7 years, that is the whole life of the partnership, to include a joint call, and to say the joint call should be year 3 or whatever, or to decide on this. So you see, it's versatile. What is important, the flagship program would be, okay, we want to make a difference on a given topic. So maybe monitoring is too broad, but I give you this example. It's one possibility. On the reverse, another flagship program could be on biodiversity and pandemics. We want to do something very quickly, and we decide to launch a flagship program, and it's on 3 years. During 3 years only, including a joint call, launch immediately, etc., etc. And we have more focused outcomes, and we want the outcomes in a very brief period. Just to give you, I don't know, because it will be the decision. It's all the work of the partnership, all the members, EC services, this dialogue leading to the objectives, which issue we want to make a difference, and according to this, the timing, the kind of activities we would mobilize, the level of resources allocated also. It can be very different from one flagship program to the other, even if all they have to be ambitious, etc. So keep in mind, it's flexible. It's not monolithic at all, the definition of flagship program.
Thank you, Xavier. So there is no more questions. I suggest to move to the next part of the next steps.
Okay, so to conclude my side, it's just to say that for the next steps, we have already announced an open consultation. You have heard that end of May, likely, we will launch a consultation as soon as the text of the partnership is released. And then it will be the opportunity for you between end of May and June to send us feedback on these suggestions, etc. And we will take this into account, and we will update the proposal for the partnership accordingly. In parallel, we have asked, that is our side, and the EC also is asking, the pre-commitments, that is first declaration of interest, and pre-commitments by members, possible members of the partnership. That is to know exactly which ministries, agencies, etc. is ready to be on board, and what would be the level of investment they plan for this. And based on this, in September, we would have a very good view on what could be the possible members, what can be the budget, the ambition. And between September and December, we will be in a position to finalize the strategic research innovation agenda of this partnership. And then we would enter another area, because we would have to respond to an EC call, and then I prefer to let the floor to Josefina maybe for this one.
Yes, actually the partnership is a part of, all the partnerships will be a part of Horizon Europe. They are mentioned in the strategic program, and there will be a call. There will be a call in the first call of Horizon Europe with the first wave of partnerships. We expect this one to be one of the lucky ones that are going to start on the first wave. That means that there will be in the first work program that is expected to be published around February 2021, which is traditionally the month that we publish our calls, there will be a topic text, and the partnership will have to prepare the proposal. If everything goes well, this proposal will be already in total harmony with the with the preparations, but there will be an opportunity for new members to join, and in the final configuration, the final architecture of who is going to apply and who is going to be in the partnership will be made at this stage. Of course, new members can be added later on, but that will require amendments of the grant agreement. So we expect to be early 2021. And then, if there are no more questions, I would like to give the floor to Humberto Delgado Rosa, who has joined us. May I ask you, Humberto, to unmute? Yes, and share. Thank you very much. Humberto Delgado Rosa is the Director for Natural Capital of the DG Environment, which is the sister DG that has promoted this partnership in the European Commission. Thank you.
Hello, Josephine, and hello, everyone. I'm actually very pleased to have a chance to at least give you some words in the ending of this event that I could not follow. But I'm informed enough about the biodiversity partnership to, I hope, tell you something meaningful. And I had thought that probably what you would appreciate more is to have a bit of a glimpse of my view on how the upcoming biodiversity strategy for 2030, to be approved tomorrow together with the Farm to Fork strategy, what does it entail? So I would use some minutes around this topic with some clues to research and to this partnership. Well, the first thing I would say is you may remember that not only the Green Deal as such, but before it, the political guidelines of the current president of the Commission has set an unprecedented ambition for biodiversity. Climate change as the two overarching threats, well underpinned by science, with potential catastrophic effects upon human well-being, and which we must tackle together. And also when it said that the EU should lead on biodiversity as it has led on climate change, that also was a game changer. And in this sense, you know, European leadership internationally just means leading by example. So that was a very clear signal that this strategy to come would be different. And indeed, it must be different because the preceding the strategies, including the one that will end the global strategy and the EU strategy to end in 2020, they did not reach the goal of halting biodiversity, and things have actually, okay, that's very nice, but that was before the pandemics and all this COVID crisis, wasn't it? So who cares about biodiversity now? Well, we really should care, because first there's the natural origin of COVID-19 that we are well aware about. Second, there's this sense that we do need thriving nature and ecosystems to buffer us against several threats, including zoonotic diseases and including the impacts of extreme weather events and so forth. So actually the strategy and the Farm to Fork strategy are both considered very opportune, very timely, precisely in the context of these pandemics and the recovery that will have to come. So both are needed, Farm to Fork, the biodiversity strategy, and I think they will get indeed huge support of a majority of the member states, because several have called for a green and, by the way, also digital recovery. So they're pretty aligned on that. So what can we expect as novelty? What's new in this strategy that makes a difference from the past? Well, I think the main difference is probably the fact that we will find there quantified EU commitments, including sectoral commitments for those areas and sectors that are linked to the main drivers of loss that are nowadays well known and ranked since the IPBES report that came last year. So land and sea use change, overexploitation, climate change itself, pollution of all kinds, and invasive alien species. You will find provisions on this, several of which quantified within the strategy. So there may be, well, some 4 chapters. One will be for sure on protection. So you can expect increased ambition on commitments towards protected areas, pretty much aligned with the zero draft for a new global deal on nature that is nowadays known, and that speaks about at least 30% protected areas on land and sea. So the EU should not come below that. And within this 30%, a third of which should be considered as strict protection in the sense of leaving nature essentially undisturbed. So it's not necessarily no-go, but it's certainly don't extract in part of these protected areas. Now, the major chapter, in my view, is likely to be the one on restoration. And I'll call your attention to the fact, you know, it's not really possible to build a political agenda on negative messaging, on doomsaying. You always need to have a sense of hope that can mobilize people. That's what you get on restoration, because you can actually put back nature where it was degraded. So expect a well ambitious EU nature restoration plan, not only announcing upcoming binding targets for restoration in 2021, but with very concrete measures tackling first the protected habitats and species of EU legislation, and that need a revamping and then favorable conservation status, but going towards also addressing farmland, forests, soil, marine ecosystems, cities, rivers. On all this, you will find quite a lot of restoration commitments, including some targets that are common with farm to fork, such as more organic farming in Europe, less excess of fertilization, less use of pesticides, especially the most risky ones, and something specific of the biodiversity strategy, which is to bring in more landscape features for biodiversity in farmland that we have lost a lot in the last decades in Europe. Another angle that will interest you, and I'm sure this partnership will pay a lot of attention to that, is nature-based solutions, of course. The link of climate as the third main driver of loss by one side, but also how much the nature can also contribute to tackle mitigation and adaptation. That's climbing up the ladder of political attention. And we do need research to tell us how green solutions can actually replace or be used in conjugation with great solutions. One word on the global side. Of course, you can also expect in the EU strategy what we aim to achieve globally. And there's also some elements which are important for science. You all know it's easier to measure CO2 in the atmosphere than to measure ecosystems or nature or biodiversity, of course. But we actually think that measurability will be fundamental for a meaningful new global deal. And that applies not only, let's say, to overarching long-term goals that could show us, as in climate, we have this 2 degrees centigrade to show us when the curve is going. The equivalent long-term goals are very welcome, and I think science has something to tell us how we can pick from that. Also, we expect to have ambitious, measurable targets up to 2030, so as to be able to have within the conventional biological diversity the same approach we now have on Paris for climate since the Paris Accord, which is measurability, reporting, and verification, the famous MRV. So process will be very important, but for that we need knowledge to be able to measure and monitor in an appropriate way. So a final couple of words on the role of science. I already said, and you'll find that in the strategy, which is this message on the need for science and research to tell us more and more how we can tap from the green solutions that have win-win benefits on several grounds. You'll also find ample reference to Horizon Europe and what it can deliver, noticeably on establishing a long-term strategy research agenda for biodiversity. Also, how the role of the missions in Horizon Europe, several of which have a very clear link with biodiversity, but also this need for a science policy mechanism that can help not only follow, but ratchet up the commitments that you hopefully will take. And I do think this partnership is very prone to be an essential component of this science policy mechanism. There's, of course, other very important partnerships in the pipeline on agroecology, water, blue economy, but I do think, for obvious reasons, this biodiversity partnership will be very important. We will also be creating in the Commission, together with European Environmental Agency, a knowledge center for biodiversity that I hope can become a one-stop shop for all the knowledge needs we may have on biodiversity. So finally, I think I would like to thank you all that are already involved in this partnership. That is for us a big promise on ensuring the delivery of what should follow of this biodiversity strategy. So fingers crossed for a good biodiversity strategy tomorrow. And thank you very much for this chance to tell you some words.
Many thanks to you two for attending and for closing this webinar. And I think it was actually great to hear it from your side, the importance of the partnership, but also of science at large in supporting the implementation of the EU biodiversity strategy, and hopefully also of the new strategy at the global scale. And I also hope it's clear for all the participants to this of this webinar that I hope the biodiversity partnership is less of a black box, and that you can see the potential of this partnership in terms of increasing collaboration between the EU and its member states, but also better representation of environmental ministries and agencies, also in terms of linking research and innovation with policy, with actions on the ground, with monitoring schemes, and also with the private sector. And also that this partnership will have the proper legitimacy to interact with science policy interfacing bodies that are active at the international level, like the IPBES and the IPCC, and even with multilateral environmental agreements. And we actually believe that the fact that this partnership is becoming more and more a reality, that this is a huge step forward. The need and the support to have this partnership in place has never been that strong. And we think that the stars are really aligning to make this happen. And we also look forward to see the biodiversity strategy tomorrow and the farm to fork strategy, and to investigate that and to see how this partnership can help to support the implementation. And then last but not least, we hope also that with this webinar, we show that this is indeed a co-creation, not only between the European Commission and the potential members of the partnership, but actually with all of you. And that we also will need all of you and all the stakeholders, and also the scientists, to deliver on the ambitious work program that we foresee. So I think I can close here by thanking all of you, also on behalf of the colleagues from the European Commission, both DG Environment and DG Research and Innovation, but also the colleagues from BiodiVERSA, for not only attending this workshop, this webinar, but also for your feedbacks along the road, because this really helps us to advance the thinking and to increase the impact of what we foresee in the future. On a practical note, you will receive a follow-up email with a link where you can find this webinar, like we have recorded this, so you can go back to the webinar if you want, and also with some more information on the partnership, and also on the consultation that we will launch following this webinar. So I don't know, Xavier, if you want to say some more to close. If
no,
not,
no. Thanks a lot. I'm really happy. I think nearly all of us, we have worked for years and decades on biodiversity, and I think it's a pleasure to see that we are very close to the possibility of the community to organize something that has not been organized so far. And as we said initially, this could have a key role in bridging the gaps between research innovation and policy, research innovation and stakeholders, research and monitoring also. And this could make a difference. And so of course, we have to realize the partnership will not be the unique tool to cope, to tackle the biodiversity crisis for sure, but it can make a difference, it can help, it can be a lever allowing to gather all the skills, all the resources we have at different levels and in different organizations. So this is why the co-design approach is very important, and why in terms of governance, we will make sure that the collective approach is here for this partnership. So thanks to all of you for sure. I was very pleased to see that we were at some stage close to 300 attendees for this webinar, which is quite something. And even time is running, and we have 170 yet. So I think it's really excellent. So thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for the activity of the attendees also through the chat. Thank you.